My name is Laura Bennett, and the night my husband decided to teach me a lesson began like an ordinary dinner. We had just finished eating at a quiet steakhouse downtown. Nothing special. Soft music, low lights, the usual conversations around us. The kind of place where people celebrate anniversaries without drawing attention. It was our 11th wedding anniversary. When we stepped outside, the air smelled like rain. The kind that hangs in the air before a storm finally breaks. My husband, Daniel, unlocked the car and held the door for me. From the outside, he looked exactly the way people expected him to look. Calm, confident, polished. Most people liked him immediately. The drive started normally. We pulled onto the highway and headed away from the city. At first, I assumed he was taking a longer route home. After 10 minutes, the streetlights disappeared. Then the restaurants. Then the houses. Only the road remained, stretching through empty fields under a dark sky. I finally asked, quietly, "Where are we going?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He kept both hands on the wheel. Then he said, almost casually, "You'll see." Another 10 minutes passed before he turned into a rest stop I didn't recognize. The place looked abandoned except for a single flickering light near the parking lot. Rain began tapping softly against the windshield. Daniel parked the car, but left the engine running. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me. "Get out," he said. I looked at him, thinking I had misunderstood. He repeated it. "Get out of the car." I stayed still. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away. Daniel leaned back in his seat and smiled slightly. Walking home might teach you some respect. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened the door and stepped onto the cracked pavement. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of wet asphalt. Before closing the door, I reached into my purse and pressed record on my phone. Then I placed it quietly in my coat pocket. Daniel watched me for a moment as if expecting something else. Maybe anger. Maybe begging. Instead, I said nothing. I closed the door. He waited another second. Then he drove away. The red glow of his taillights disappeared into the dark highway. I stood there for a few moments after the car was gone. Then I looked toward the empty gas station building beside the parking lot. A black pickup truck was parked behind it. The headlights turned on. A man stepped out, holding an umbrella. He walked toward me slowly. "Did you get it?" he asked. I nodded and held up my phone. "Yes," I said. Every word. The man was my brother. And the night Daniel believed he was humiliating me was actually the final step in something that had been quietly unfolding for almost a year. Daniel had always been good at appearances. At dinner parties, he spoke easily with investors and neighbors. He told stories about the hedge fund he managed and the clients who trusted him with their money. People admired him. They said things like, "Laura, you're lucky." I used to smile when they said that. At home, Daniel preferred a different version of things. He liked order, control, efficiency. At first, the changes were small. He questioned my spending. Not aggressively, just small comments. "Do we really need organic vegetables? Why are you still volunteering at that nonprofit? Wouldn't it be easier if I handled the finances?" The questions slowly became decisions. He suggested I leave my consulting job. He said the travel schedule would eventually strain the marriage. I agreed. Later, he recommended consolidating our accounts so things would be simpler. I agreed again. For a while, life settled into a quiet routine. Dinner parties, charity events, business trips. And gradually, Daniel managed everything. Money, accounts, investments, even the paperwork I signed. At some point, I noticed something that didn't feel right. It started with a withdrawal, $10,000. I saw it while logging in to pay a utility bill. When I asked Daniel about it, he didn't look up from his laptop. "Business expense," he said. Then he added something else. "You wouldn't really understand the structure." I remember nodding, but something about the way he said it stayed with me. A few days later, while making the bed, I found a pearl earring under Daniel's pillow. It wasn't mine. When I held it up, Daniel paused just long enough for me to notice. Then he shrugged. "Probably from a client dinner," he said. I placed it on the nightstand. "Of course," I replied. That night, I started writing things down. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, amounts, small details. I kept the notebook inside an old cookbook in the kitchen. Every time something felt slightly off, I added a line. At first, there were only a few entries. But patterns have a way of forming if you give them time. And after a while, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The person I called first was my brother, Evan Bennett. Evan used to work in military communications. After leaving the service, He started installing security systems for businesses. When I explained the situation, he listened quietly. Then he asked one question. "Do you want to know the truth?" he said. "Or do you want peace?" I thought about it for a moment. "The truth," I said. There was a long pause on the line. "All right," he replied. "Then we do this carefully." That was the beginning. And by the time Daniel left me at that rest stop 11 months later, the plan was already almost complete. I stood under Evan's umbrella while the rain finally started falling. "Let's go," he said. I nodded and climbed into the truck. As we pulled back onto the highway, Evan glanced at the phone in my hand. "That recording," he said, "is going to matter." I placed the phone face down on the dashboard. "Yes," I said. Rebecca said the same thing. Evan looked over. "The lawyer?" "Yes." Then I looked out the window at the rain streaking across the glass. "And tomorrow morning," I said quietly, "we start using everything we've collected." Then I waited. That night, Evan drove me to a small hotel near the river on the east side of the city. It was the kind of place business travelers use when they want quiet more than charm. Clean lobby, soft carpet, a bowl of wrapped mints at the front desk. The rain followed us all the way there, tapping steadily against the glass doors as we walked in. I checked in under my maiden name. That part had been arranged in advance. The clerk gave me a room key, a practiced smile, and a quick look that told me I looked worse than I felt. My hair was damp around the collar. The hem of my coat was wet. I thanked her, took the key, and rode the elevator to the 4th floor. Room 417 smelled faintly like laundry soap and old air conditioning. I locked the door, set the chain, and placed my bag on the chair by the window. Then I took off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time that evening, the room was completely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. Evan arrived about 15 minutes later with coffee and a small paper bag from a pharmacy. Toothbrush, travel toothpaste, face wash, a comb. Practical things. He set everything on the desk without comment and opened his laptop. "Send me the file," he said. I forwarded him the recording from my phone. We listened to it once. The sound was clear. Daniel's voice was measured, almost bored. That made it worse. There was no confusion in it. No argument. No heat of the moment. Just deliberate cruelty presented as correction. Walking home might teach you some respect. When it ended, Evan closed the laptop halfway. "That's clean," he said. I nodded. He meant usable. A little after midnight, my attorney called. Her name was Miriam Hale, and she had spent most of her career dealing with cases where money and control were tied together so tightly that people outside the marriage could not tell one from the other. She never rushed her words. I liked that about her. "Are you safe?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you alone?" "Evan is here." "Good," she said. "Do not go home tomorrow. Do not answer long messages. Do not explain anything. We stay with records, not emotion." I stood and moved toward the window while she spoke. Outside, the riverfront lights blurred through the rain. Miriam continued, calm as ever. "I'm filing first thing in the morning. Temporary financial restraint. Exclusive access request. Emergency hearing. But I need one more thing from you before 8. "What?" "The timeline," she said. "Not the whole marriage. Just the sequence. Withdrawals. Account changes. Suspicious travel. Verbal incidents. Any signed documents you now believe were misrepresented." I already had most of it in folders. That had taken months. The first time I met Miriam, I brought her a legal pad with loose notes. Dates scribbled in the margins. Question marks beside transfers I didn't understand. Copies of statements I had printed at the library because I did not want them showing up on our home printer log. She looked through the pages for less than 10 minutes before saying, "This is not disorganization. This is the beginning of a case." After that, she gave me a rule. Do not confront. Do not accuse. Do not warn. Just collect. So that became my method. I collected screenshots. I collected account statements. I collected change notifications from banks Daniel assumed I never checked. I collected copies of documents he left half visible on his desk after thinking I had gone upstairs. Some of it was small. A transfer. A password reset. A reservation confirmation sent to a private email address I was not supposed to know existed. Some of it was larger. One evening, 3 months before the rest stop, Daniel left his tablet charging in the kitchen while he took a call outside. The screen lit up with a message preview from a contact saved only as in. I moved the papers from the blue folder. Call me before she sees anything. I did not touch the device. I only wrote down the exact time and wording from memory. Then, after he went to sleep, I checked the office trash. The blue folder had been there earlier that afternoon. It was gone. The next morning, I called Miriam. Good, she said after I told her. That means documents are moving. People only move paper when they know paper matters. Another time, I noticed Daniel had begun stopping at the mailbox before I could get there. Not every day, just on days when financial mail usually arrived. That was when Evan helped me open a private post office box. Simple, legal, separate. After that, I redirected replacement statements and tax notices where I could. Not enough to alarm Daniel, just enough to create a parallel record. Miriam called it building structure. Evan called it not being foolish. I called it breathing room. Around 2 in the morning, after I emailed Miriam the updated timeline, I made tea using the small coffee machine in the room. The water tasted faintly metallic, but the heat helped. Evan was still at the desk, reviewing files. Did you ever find out who N was? He asked. Yes, I said. He waited. Nicole Mercer. He looked up. The assistant. I nodded. Daniel had introduced her to me 6 months earlier at a charity reception. She was polished, attentive, and careful in the way people are when they already know more than they should. She had shaken my hand and held it a fraction too long. It's so nice to finally meet you, she said. At the time, I noticed 2 things. First, she wore a silk scarf I had once left in Daniel's car and later assumed I had misplaced. Second, Daniel interrupted before I could ask where we had almost met before. After that night, Nicole's name began appearing in quiet places. Restaurant charges on evenings Daniel claimed he had client meetings. Parking receipts near her apartment building. A hotel reservation in Denver under his initials, made during what was supposed to be a conference with 3 other partners who later turned out not to have attended. I never asked Daniel about any of it. That used to surprise people when I told the story later. They assumed silence meant fear. It did not. By then, silence was procedure. If I asked too early, he would close doors. If I waited, he would leave them open just long enough. That was how I learned to think about the situation, not as one large betrayal, but as a series of systems. Marriage was one system, money was another, image was another, and Daniel depended on all 3 remaining undisturbed. So I stopped disturbing them. I simply watched. I watched him become careless in small ways. He began speaking more freely on late-night phone calls from his study with the door partly closed. He assumed I was asleep by 11. Usually, I was in the guest bathroom with the shower running softly and my phone on the counter, recording from the hall table outside his office. Never dramatic, never risky, just enough. One night, I captured him saying, "By the time she figures it out, the liquid assets will be out of reach." Another night, "No, she signs whatever I put in front of her." And once, very quietly, followed by a laugh, "She still thinks the joint account is the real picture." That recording mattered. So did the handwriting samples. So did the false business reimbursements. So did the pattern of small international wires that did not fit any household or declared business purpose. This was where Anita Flores came in. Anita was a forensic accountant Miriam trusted. I met her in a plain office above a title company downtown. She wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in short, precise sentences. When I handed her the first batch of statements, she spread them across the table and looked at them for a long time. Then she tapped 3 entries with her pen. "These are not random," she said. "What are they?" "Testing transfers," she replied. "Small movement first, then larger movement after no one reacts." "Can you prove that?" She looked at me steadily. "Given time," she said, "I can usually prove what people thought was invisible." And she did. Over the next several months, Anita traced a pattern Daniel had hidden inside routine activity. Payments to consulting entities that did not appear to have staff or public operations. Round number transfers followed by immediate offshore movement. Management fees duplicated under slightly altered names. It was technical work, quiet work, the kind of work that never looks emotional on paper, which was exactly why it mattered. By 3:30 in the morning, Evan had built backup copies of the rest stop recording and uploaded them to 2 secure locations. I folded my damp coat over the chair and laid out the navy suit I had kept hidden at the back of a garment bag for weeks. "Try to sleep," he said. "I will." But I didn't, not really. I turned off the lamp and lay still in the dark listening to the steady hum of the vent. At 6:12 a.m., my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I let it ring. Then a text came through. "Where are you?" A minute later, "This has gone far enough." Then, "Call me now." I did not respond. At 6:31, another message appeared. If you try to embarrass me over some stupid anniversary argument, you will regret it. I read that one twice. Then I took a screenshot, forwarded it to Miriam, and placed the phone face down on the nightstand. A few minutes later, Miriam replied with 4 words. Good. Save everything. No reply. So I got up, showered, dressed slowly, and buttoned the navy jacket with steady hands. Step 1. Keep records. Step 2. Say little. Step 3. Arrive prepared. At 7:40, there was a knock at the door. Not Daniel. Not hotel staff. It was Anita, holding a banker's box full of copied statements and one thin gray folder tucked under her arm. I found something else, she said. I stepped aside to let her in. She set the gray folder on the desk and opened it. Inside was a property record, a condominium purchase, paid through an LLC, 6 months earlier. Nicole Mercer listed as occupant. Daniel Bennett authorized as managing member. I looked at the page for a long moment. Not because I was shocked. That part had already passed. I looked because it changed the morning. Miriam's hearing was no longer only about abandonment or coercive control. Now it was also about concealment, asset diversion, and intent. Anita closed the folder carefully. Miriam said to bring this directly to court, she said. I nodded. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The room was quiet again. Then I picked up my bag, took the folder, and headed for the courthouse. The courthouse always smelled the same to me. Cool air, old paper, floor polish, and coffee someone had brought in too early. By the time I arrived, Miriam was already there. She stood near the security line in a charcoal suit, one hand on a leather file case, speaking quietly to a clerk she seemed to know by name. She ended the conversation, turned, and gave me a brief nod that meant 2 things at once. You're on time. Stay steady. Evan came in a minute later carrying Anita's box. He moved through the lobby with the same practical calm he brought to everything. No wasted motion. No unnecessary words. We met near a row of hard wooden benches along the wall. Miriam took the gray folder from my hand and opened it immediately. Her eyes moved across the property record once, then again more slowly. That helps, she said. Because of Nicole? I asked. Because of intent, Miriam replied. Separate residence. Separate financial channel. Hidden control. It shows planning. She slid the folder into her case and closed the clasp. Then she looked at me. From this point on, you do not react to him. If he speaks to you, you do not explain. If his attorney tries to make this about a marital disagreement, you let me answer it. We are not here to describe feelings. We are here to define facts. I nodded. That was one of Miriam's phrases. Define facts. It sounds simple when you hear it that way. It did not feel simple at the time. I had spent years being interrupted, redirected, corrected, and told what things really meant. Money meant stress. Secrecy meant business. Silence meant peace. Every unpleasant thing had been given a cleaner name. Standing in that courthouse, I understood that the first shift in power had very little to do with anger. It had to do with naming things accurately. Abandonment was abandonment. Concealment was concealment. Threats were threats, and records had a way of holding their shape once they were brought into the light. We were early for the hearing, so Miriam used the time carefully. She had me sit on the bench while she reviewed the order of materials with Evan and Anita in low voices. Recording first. Message screenshot second. Account summaries third. Property record fourth. Supporting timeline last, only if needed. She did not build cases the way Daniel built narratives. She did not pile things up for effect. She arranged them in sequence, each piece making the next one harder to deny. I watched her sort papers while people moved around us. A deputy checked badges at the inner door. A woman in a red coat bounced a restless child on her knee. Somewhere down the hall, a copier started and stopped again. Ordinary sounds. I remember being grateful for them. At 8:23, my phone vibrated again. Daniel. I looked at the screen but did not answer. Another call came immediately after. Then a text. Pick up. Now. A minute later. You are making a very expensive mistake. I took screenshots of both and sent them to Miriam. She read them without expression and held out her hand. Phone, she said. I gave it to her. She switched it to silent, placed it face down on top of the closed file case, and said, Good. He's helping. That was another thing I learned from her. People who rely on control often become careless when it stops working. They mistake urgency for strength. They make contact they should not make. They put pressure in writing. They create timestamps. At 8:41, Daniel walked into the lobby. He saw me first. Even from across the room, I could tell he had not slept. His tie was wrong for the suit he wore. His hair was slightly off at the side, as if he had fixed it quickly in the car. Beside him was a tall man in a dark blue suit carrying a slim briefcase. I knew immediately that the man was his attorney. Daniel slowed when he realized I was not alone. He noticed Evan first, then Anita, then Miriam. The expression on his face changed in stages. Irritation, confusion, calculation. He said my name once, not loudly. Laura. I stayed seated. Miriam stepped half a pace forward before he got any closer. Mr. Bennett, she said evenly. You'll speak to counsel. Daniel looked at her, then at me again. This is unnecessary, he said. No one answered. He gave a short laugh that did not sound natural. This is an anniversary argument, he said. She took it personally. Still no one answered. He turned directly toward me this time. You know exactly what happened. I folded my hands in my lap and looked back at him. Yes, I said. That was all. Nothing more. For a moment, he seemed almost relieved to hear my voice, as if he thought a conversation might still be possible. Then his attorney touched his arm and murmured something. Daniel stepped back. That was the first moment I understood he felt the ground moving. Not because of the hearing itself, because the pattern had changed. Normally he would speak, and I would fill the silence trying to smooth the situation, soften the edge, explain what I meant. That morning I did none of those things. I let the silence remain exactly where it was. And for the first time in years, Daniel had to stand inside it by himself. We were called upstairs a few minutes later. Courtroom 2B was smaller than I expected. Pale walls, state seal behind the bench, narrow windows letting in a flat gray light from the morning after the storm. I sat beside Miriam at the front table. Evan and Anita took seats behind us. Daniel sat across the aisle with his attorney. He kept adjusting his cuff as if the fabric were bothering him. The judge entered at 9 sharp. Her name was Judge Ellen Mercer, and she ran her courtroom with the calm efficiency of someone who had heard every kind of performance and had very little patience left for most of them. We stood, then we sat. Miriam rose first. She did not waste words. Your Honor, we are here this morning on an emergency application involving spousal abandonment, coercive conduct, concealment of marital assets, and immediate risk of dissipation of funds. The words were plain, measured, each one carrying exactly the weight it needed. Across the room, Daniel's attorney stood. Your Honor, counsel is attempting to convert a private marital disagreement into a financial emergency without full context. Judge Mercer lifted a hand. I'll decide what context I need, she said. The room went quiet. Miriam continued. She began with the recording. Not the whole thing, only the relevant portion. The clerk adjusted the speaker volume. A soft static filled the room. Then Daniel's voice came through clear and unmistakable. Get out. Walking home might teach you some respect. No raised tone. No confusion. Just deliberate instruction. When the clip ended, Judge Mercer looked at Daniel. Did you make that statement? Daniel sat forward slightly. It was not meant literally, he said. We were having a disagreement. I expected her to call a car. Miriam did not look at him. She handed the judge a printed map. Your Honor, the rest stop location was 34 miles from the marital residence, with no active services at that hour and no operating ride access within the immediate area due to storm conditions. We have attached weather records and service logs. Judge Mercer reviewed the page briefly. Then she asked, Did you leave her there? Daniel hesitated. Yes, but that will do, the judge said. The first shift was small on the surface. Just a few words, a few pages, a few answers no longer hidden behind tone. But I felt it. The hearing was no longer about whether Daniel could persuade a room. It was about whether the record matched his explanation. And it did not. Miriam moved to the text next. The 3 messages from that morning. Pick up. Now. You are making a very expensive mistake. Then the earlier one. If you try to embarrass me over some stupid anniversary argument, you will regret it. Daniel's attorney objected to tone, implication, incomplete context. Judge Mercer allowed the messages provisionally and said she would assign them the weight they deserved. That was enough. Then Anita was called. She walked to the witness stand with her usual quiet precision, was sworn in, and opened a thin binder prepared for her that morning. Miriam guided her through the financial summary slowly. Not every account. Not every transfer. Just the pattern. Testing transfers. Repeated routing through entities with no visible operating footprint. Movement of marital funds into restricted channels. Possible concealment through layered LLC structures. When Anita mentioned the condominium, Daniel looked up sharply for the first time. His attorney objected again. Miriam handed over the record. Judge Mercer reviewed it for a long moment. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "is this LLC under your control?" Daniel leaned toward his attorney. They exchanged a few quick words. His attorney stood. "Your Honor, the entity is part of a larger investment framework, and occupancy does not necessarily." Judge Mercer interrupted. "That was not the question." She looked back at Daniel. "Is the LLC under your control?" He answered more quietly this time. "Yes." The courtroom remained still. Then Judge Mercer asked the next question. "Was this property disclosed in your preliminary financial materials?" No one spoke for a moment. His attorney answered instead. "Not at this time." The judge wrote something down. I did not feel triumph. I remember that clearly. What I felt was order. For months, everything had existed in pieces. Notes in a cookbook, statements in folders, late-night recordings, copied forms, details that sounded strange when separated from one another. But here, under oath and on the record, the pieces had started to connect. Miriam did not push harder than she needed to. That was part of her discipline. Once a fact was established, she let it stand. By the time the judge called a brief recess to review the emergency restraint request, the room had changed. Daniel knew it. His attorney knew it. And I knew it too. We stepped out into the hallway while the judge considered the interim orders. No one said much. Anita closed her binder. Evan handed me a bottle of water. Miriam stood near the window reading through her notes one last time. Then my phone, still in her case, vibrated again. She took it out, checked the screen, and showed it to me. The message was not from Daniel. It was from Nicole Mercer. It read, "He told me the hearing was about a misunderstanding. I don't think that's true. I have documents." Miriam looked at me once, then back at the phone. "Do you know where she is?" she asked. "No." She typed a short reply herself. "Do not send anything yet. Are you nearby?" Nicole answered in less than a minute. "Downstairs. In my car." Miriam slid the phone back into the case and closed it. Then she looked toward the courtroom doors as the bailiff called everyone back in. "Good," she said quietly. And we went back inside. When we returned to the courtroom, the air felt different. Not louder, not tense in any obvious way, just more defined, as if everyone had quietly accepted that this was no longer going to be handled through charm or interruption. Judge Mercer resumed her seat and reviewed the papers in front of her for several seconds before speaking. "Pending full hearing," she said, "the court is entering a temporary restraint on transfer of marital assets, temporary exclusive use of the primary residence to the petitioner, and immediate preservation of all financial records related to the disclosed and undisclosed entities identified this morning." Daniel's attorney stood so quickly that his chair shifted against the floor. "Your Honor." The judge looked up. "I'm not finished." He sat down again. She continued in the same calm tone. "Mr. Bennett is further instructed to have no direct contact with the petitioner except through counsel pending review of the additional financial materials." That was the first order. Not final, not dramatic, just immediate. But it changed the structure of the day. Daniel could no longer decide, in real time, how close he stood, how often he called, how much pressure he applied, or which version of events he repeated until it started sounding reasonable. The court had narrowed the lanes. That mattered. Miriam made one small note in the margin of her pad and then folded her hands. Beside me, I could feel my own breathing slow. Judge Mercer turned to Miriam. "You mentioned additional materials may be forthcoming." "Yes, Your Honor." "From whom?" Miriam did not glance at me. "We may have a cooperating third party with documents relating to asset movement and occupancy of the undeclared property." Across the room, Daniel went still, not visibly to anyone who did not know him. But I knew him. His stillness was never calm. It was calculation under strain. His attorney asked for a moment to confer. The judge allowed it. The two of them leaned close together. Daniel spoke first, fast and low. His attorney replied without looking at him. Then Daniel looked toward me. I did not hold his gaze for long. I had stopped treating eye contact like a negotiation. I simply looked away and straightened the papers in front of me. That was part of the shift, too. For years, Daniel had depended on reaction, a flinch, a defense, a correction, something he could push against. Without that, he was left with procedure, and procedure is very difficult to charm. During the next 15 minutes, the hearing narrowed into scheduling, disclosure deadlines, access instructions, and preservation language. Most people would have found it dry. I found it clarifying. This was where lives actually changed. In deadlines, in signatures, in restrictions, in who had to produce what and by when. I wrote the steps down exactly as Miriam whispered them. Step 1, preserve everything. Step 2, let Nicole decide whether she will cooperate. Step 3, move before Daniel has time to reorganize the paper trail. That was how I kept myself steady, not by thinking about marriage or betrayal or embarrassment. Just steps, order, sequence. When the hearing ended, the bailiff opened the side door and people began filing into the hallway. Daniel moved toward us almost immediately, but his attorney caught his sleeve and said something firm enough to stop him. He looked at me once more, this time with a kind of disbelief that was almost more revealing than anger. I gathered my bag and stood. Miriam spoke quietly. We're not leaving through the front steps. Because of reporters? I asked. Because of him, she said. There were no reporters yet. Not then. That came later. At that point, this was still a private matter balancing on the edge of becoming something else. We used a side corridor near family records and went down a narrow staircase that smelled faintly of dust and copier toner. At the bottom was a rear lobby with 2 vending machines, an empty information desk, and a glass door looking out onto a service lane. Nicole Mercer was waiting there. She was sitting alone on a metal bench with a large tote bag at her feet and both hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup she did not seem to be drinking. She stood when she saw Miriam. In court, I had imagined this moment differently. More anger, maybe. More confrontation. But when I saw her in person, what I noticed first was how tired she looked. Not undone, just tired in the careful way people look when they have been holding a position for too long and are no longer sure it can be defended. Miriam introduced herself first, then Anita, then Evan. Finally, she looked at me. This is Laura Bennett. Nicole nodded once. I know. Her voice was lower than I expected. For a second, no one spoke. Then Nicole reached into the tote bag and pulled out a manila envelope and a slim silver flash drive. I'm not here for a scene, she said. I just want the record to be accurate. Miriam took the envelope but did not open it yet. What's in it? Copies of wire confirmations, internal account summaries, 2 lease-related emails, and messages from Daniel instructing me to move client funds through side entities before quarter end. She paused. There are also photos from the condo. Anita glanced at Miriam. Originals? She asked. Most of them, yes, Nicole replied. Some are screenshots because that was all I could get without being noticed. Miriam nodded once. That's fine. We'll sort chain of custody later. Nicole looked at me then, directly, not defensively. He told me you already knew about everything, she said. Then he told me the hearing was just about your temper. When I saw the court notice this morning, I understood that wasn't true. I listened without interrupting. She continued. I'm not pretending I handled any of this well. I didn't. But I also don't want my name attached to financial fraud because he thinks everyone around him will keep covering for him. That, more than anything, sounded like Daniel's real mistake. He always believed people would keep playing the role he assigned them, even after the cost changed. Miriam finally opened the envelope. Inside were neatly clipped packets, labeled in small, precise handwriting. Wire transfers, property messages, client movement. Anita took one of the bundles and began flipping through it page by page. Her expression did not change, but I could tell by the speed of her hands that the contents mattered. Evan moved slightly closer to the door, not tense, just attentive. Nicole set the coffee cup down on the bench. There's one more thing, she said. From the tote bag, she removed a small spiral notebook. I kept dates, she said. When he used my apartment. When he stayed at the condo. When he said he was moving money before filing. I wrote it down because I thought I might need it one day. I looked at the notebook for a moment, then at her. That detail felt familiar in a way I had not expected. Separate notebook, separate dates, separate quiet record of what someone powerful assumed nobody was tracking. Miriam took the notebook carefully. We'll make copies immediately, she said. Nicole nodded. I don't want to go back to the office today. You won't, Miriam replied. Not alone. That was when my phone buzzed in my bag. I took it out. The message was from an unknown number. Only one line. Check the house safe before he gets there. I showed the screen to Evan first. He read it once, then looked at me. Might be real, he said. Miriam was already reaching for her car keys. Then we move now, she said. And we headed for the parking lot. We drove in 2 cars. Miriam took the lead with Anita and Nicole. Evan drove me in his truck. The sky had cleared by then, but the roads were still wet, and every stoplight reflected sharply off the pavement. Neither of us spoke much on the way. Evan kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting lightly near the gear shift. I held my phone in my lap and looked at the unknown message again. Check the house safe before he gets there. No name, no explanation, just instruction. That was enough. By then I had learned not to ignore clear language. Our house stood at the end of a quiet street lined with trimmed hedges and large trees. In the late morning light, it looked exactly the way it always had. Clean brick, blue shutters, 2 cars and neighboring driveways. Nothing about it suggested secrecy or fear. That was part of the difficulty with controlled homes. They often looked calm from the outside. When we pulled in, Miriam parked behind the gate line rather than in the center of the driveway. Why? I asked. So nobody can trap us in, she said. Simple answer. Practical answer. We went in through the side entrance by the mudroom. Evan used the backup key I had given him months earlier. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the coffee Daniel had made that morning before leaving to find me. I noticed the mug first, still in the sink. That detail stayed with me longer than I expected. Miriam turned to all of us before anyone moved farther inside. No wandering, she said. No assumptions. We are here for one purpose only. Safe, documents, exit. Then she looked directly at me. You open it. I nodded. The safe was built into the wall behind a row of jackets in Daniel's study closet. He had installed it 5 years earlier after claiming it was necessary for passports, jewelry, and tax records. He liked systems that looked protective when they were really about control. I stepped into the closet, moved the garment bags aside, and entered the code. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the lock released. Inside were the usual items. Passports, a watch box, a velvet pouch, an envelope of old family documents. And beneath them, pushed flat at the back, 2 things that did not belong with the rest. A sealed brown document envelope, and a second phone. I set both items on Daniel's desk without opening them. Miriam pulled on a pair of thin gloves from her bag. She looked at me first. Did you know those were there? No. She nodded and slit open the brown envelope carefully with a letter opener from Daniel's desk. Inside were copies of transfer authorizations, 2 notarized pages related to the condo LLC, and a draft packet labeled post-nuptial amendment. I felt my throat tighten slightly, but I did not touch the papers. Miriam read the first page, then the second. Then she placed the packet flat on the desk and looked at me. He was preparing to change the property terms, she said. Without telling me, he was preparing something, she replied. Whether it would have held up is a different question. I understood her tone. Facts first, interpretation second. Anita stepped forward and scanned the transfer pages quickly. These account numbers matched Nicole's packet, she said. Same routing pattern. The second phone mattered too. Evan placed it on a charging cable he found in the desk drawer. After a moment, the screen lit up. No passcode. That surprised all of us. But people who live by compartmentalization sometimes begin to believe the compartment itself is security. The phone opened to a message thread almost immediately. Nicole turned away before anyone asked her to look. Miriam held the device at an angle and read silently. Then she handed it to Anita. Forwarding instructions, Anita said, Dates. Confirmation screenshots. Some client initials. I stood very still. Not frozen. Just steady. This was the kind of moment people often imagine as emotional. A wife discovers the hidden phone, the hidden papers, the proof of the other life. What I remember instead is the quiet ticking of the study clock and the faint hum from the air vent above the bookshelf. Details became very clear to me in those moments. The grain of the wood desk, the dry feel of the closet wall under my fingers, the sound of Evan opening his evidence envelopes. That was how control returned. Not through outrage, through attention. Miriam moved quickly after that. Step 1, she said, photograph everything in place. Evan took wide shots of the safe interior, the desk, the envelope, the phone screen, the document stack. Step 2, Miriam continued. Bag copies, not originals where possible, unless immediate preservation is necessary. Anita began separating duplicates from signed materials. Step 3, Miriam said, we leave before he arrives. That was the plan. It almost worked perfectly. Almost. At 11:18, the front door opened. No key in the lock. Just the abrupt sound of the door swinging inward and hitting the stopper behind it. Daniel. No one moved at first. His footsteps crossed the foyer, then the hall. He had come home fast. I could hear it in the way he set things down too hard. Car keys. Briefcase. Phone. Then silence. He had seen the side gate camera alert on his phone, I realized. Or maybe a neighbor had texted. Either way, he knew people were in the house. His voice carried from the hallway. Laura. No one answered. A second later, he appeared in the study doorway. He stopped there, took in the open safe, the people in the room, the phone on the desk, the document packet. It was the clearest expression I had ever seen on his face. Not anger first, recognition, then calculation, then anger. What is this? He asked. Miriam answered before I could. This is a lawful evidence preservation process related to active court proceedings. Daniel ignored her and looked directly at me. You brought people into my house. I stood beside the desk with my hands lightly clasped. Our house, I said. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. No, he said. No, Laura, you don't get to do this. You disappear overnight. You drag in a lawyer, and now you're tearing through private files like some kind of victim in a bad movie. His voice was rising. Mine did not. I'm not tearing through anything, I said. I'm documenting what you hid. That landed. Not because the words were dramatic, because they were accurate. He stepped farther into the room, but Evan shifted just slightly, enough to make the space clear without touching him. Daniel noticed. Who exactly do you think you are? He said to Evan. Evan's tone remained flat. Not part of this conversation. Daniel looked at Miriam. You don't have authority to enter my home. Miriam opened her portfolio and removed the temporary order. I have authority to advise my client regarding access to the marital residence and preservation of materials relevant to the hearing this morning, she said. You may read the order if you'd like. She held it out. He did not take it. That was the setting for the confrontation. Not a restaurant. Not a front lawn. Not a loud public collapse. A study. An open safe. A court order on good paper. A hidden phone charging beside a stack of notarized documents. Daniel tried one more approach. His voice lowered. Softer. Controlled. Laura, he said, whatever you think you found, we can sort it out privately. You don't need all of this. I looked at him. For years, that tone had worked better than anger. It invited me to become reasonable, flexible, embarrassed by my own clarity. But by then I had already learned the difference between privacy and concealment. Yes, I said. I do. He stared at me for a long moment. Then his eyes shifted to the brown packet on the desk. His expression changed again, very slightly. That was when I knew he had recognized the postnuptial draft. Not because he said it, because he stopped speaking. Miriam noticed too. She did not waste the opening. Mr. Bennett, she said, calm as ever. If there are additional records not yet disclosed, now would be an excellent time to have counsel address that. He did not answer her. Instead, he looked at me and said, You really think you understand what you're doing? I answered with the only thing that mattered. I understand enough to stop signing papers I haven't read. The room went quiet after that. No speeches, no insults, no scene, just silence and the fact of what was sitting in plain view between us. Daniel was the one who broke first, not by shouting, by reaching. He moved toward the phone on the desk, maybe out of instinct, maybe to pocket it before anyone stopped him. Evan stepped in front of the desk at the same time, and Daniel pulled back immediately. Miriam's tone hardened for the first time that day. Do not touch anything else. He looked at her, then at the open safe, then back at me. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel seemed to understand that the room was no longer organized around his version of events. It was organized around sequence, evidence, witnesses, orders, timelines. He had spent years building a life that depended on me staying uncertain. Now uncertainty belonged to him. Miriam handed Anita 2 sealed evidence envelopes and nodded toward the documents. Finish, she said. Then she turned to Daniel. You should call your attorney. He gave a bitter smile. I already did. Miriam inclined her head once. Good. A minute later, Daniel's phone rang in his pocket. He looked at the screen and answered with visible restraint. Yes, He listened for several seconds. Then his face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. His attorney was telling him something he did not want to hear. Probably about the temporary order. Probably about Nicole. Possibly about disclosure obligations that had just become much more serious. He said very little in response. Just, I see. Then, no, they're still here. Then silence again. When he ended the call, the room felt settled in a new way. He no longer looked angry. He looked occupied. That was different. Anger searches for reaction. Occupation starts calculating loss. Miriam closed the final evidence envelope and passed it to Devin. "We're done," she said. I looked once around the study before leaving. The open safe. The lifted jackets. The empty space where the hidden phone had been. The desk where Daniel had signed so many things without expecting to be questioned. Then I picked up my bag. As I reached the doorway, Daniel spoke again. Not loudly. "Laura." I turned. He stood near the window, one hand against the back of his chair. "What now?" he asked. There was no softness in the question, but there was something new in it. He genuinely did not know. I thought about answering in detail. Court dates, document production, forensic review, possible client notices, property tracing, separate civil exposure. Instead, I said the simplest true thing. "Now," I replied. "Other people start reading." Then I walked out. After we left the house, Miriam had Evan drive me to her office instead of the hotel. "Too many moving parts now," she said. "I want everything centralized." Her office was on the 6th floor of an older building downtown, above a dentist and across from a bank. The reception area was quiet, with 2 armchairs, a water dispenser, and framed black and white photographs of the city from 40 years ago. I had been there before, but that afternoon it felt different. Less like a place where I was asking for help, more like a place where the record was finally catching up. Miriam set up in the conference room. Anita spread documents across the long table in neat rows. Nicole sat at the far end with a legal pad and a glass of water she barely touched. Evan stood near the door, answering brief calls, and then stepping back out into the hall. No one hurried. That mattered. Urgency can make people sloppy. Process usually does the opposite. By 1 o'clock, the evidence from the house had been photographed, logged, and cross-referenced against Anita's spreadsheets and Nicole's packet. The hidden phone gave us more than I expected. Not one dramatic revelation. Several useful ones. Message threads, forwarding instructions, photos of account summaries, a scanned draft of the post-nuptial amendment Daniel had apparently planned to put in front of me after a calmer week. There were also calendar entries tied to the condominium and 2 notes that appeared to refer to client funds being shifted before a reporting cycle closed. Miriam read those twice. Then she picked up her office phone and made 3 calls in a row. First to a forensic data vendor. Second to co-counsel on the financial side. Third to the court clerk to request an accelerated filing slot for supplemental materials. She took notes while she spoke. Dates, names, reference numbers. Nothing about it felt theatrical. It felt inevitable. A little after 2, Anita turned her laptop toward us and showed us the consolidated timeline she had built. It began with the first unexplained transfer I had noticed 18 months earlier. Then the shell entities. Then duplicate management fees. Then property movement. Then private travel. Then the post-nuptial draft. Then the rest stop recording. Then the hidden phone and safe documents. Spread out that way, the story looked less like chaos and more like method. A sequence of decisions. Repeated patterns. Escalating concealment. I studied the line of dates for a long moment. Can a person really think this would stay hidden? I asked. Anita adjusted her glasses. Some do, she said. Especially if nobody has ever required them to account for anything in order. That was one of the clearest answers anyone gave me during that period. Later that afternoon, Daniel's attorney sent Miriam a formal letter objecting to what he called an overreach into private marital matters and disputing characterization of the financial records. Miriam read it once, marked 2 sections with a pen, and slid it aside. He's narrowing, she said. What does that mean? I asked. It means he's no longer denying the paper exists, she replied. He's trying to reframe what the paper means. That usually happens when denial is no longer workable. By 3:30, we had the next set of steps. Supplemental filing that day. Preservation demand to Daniel's firm. Independent notice preparation for potentially affected clients, if required. Formal request for a forensic freeze on the LLC structures tied to the condo and transfer chain. And one more thing. Nicole was going to give a sworn statement. Miriam asked her twice if she was certain. Nicole said yes both times. She did not cry. She did not dramatize anything. She simply sat with her back straight and answered questions in a low, steady voice while a court reporter typed each word. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Miriam said, "Thank you." That was all. Truth often arrives less dramatically than people expect. More paperwork, less speech. At 4:12 p.m., my phone buzzed with a number I recognized from Daniel's firm. I showed Miriam. She shook her head. No direct contact. A voicemail came in seconds later. Then another. Miriam listened to them with me in the room. The first was from Daniel himself, though he tried to sound controlled. "Laura, call me back. This has gotten out of hand, and you are being advised by people who do not understand the business implications." The second was shorter. "You need to stop this before other agencies get involved." Miriam saved both. "Good," she said, not because the words were kind, because they showed what mattered to him now. Not the marriage, not misunderstanding, exposure. At 5:07 p.m., the first outside agency contact arrived. Not with flashing lights, not with officers at the door, just an email. A federal regulatory inquiry routed through counsel requesting preservation of certain records tied to fund transfers and related entities. Miriam printed it and placed it in a new folder. Daniel had spent years relying on private pressure and private confusion. The moment other systems began to look at the same documents, his control narrowed quickly. By evening, the story had moved beyond me. That was important. My experience mattered, yes. The recording mattered. The texts mattered. The house safe mattered. But what changed everything was that the same habits Daniel used inside the marriage appeared to overlap with what he was doing in business. Concealment, redirection, pressure, assumption that no one would compare notes. Now people were comparing notes. Over the next several weeks, that process expanded in the ordinary way serious matters often do. Subpoenas, production deadlines, forensic copies, interviews, a temporary freeze on certain accounts, a more detailed review of client communications. I did not attend every meeting. I did not need to. That was another shift I had to learn. For years, I believed safety depended on constant attention, watching everything, anticipating every turn. But once the right systems were in motion, my job was no longer to hold the entire structure up by myself. My job was to stay accurate. So I stayed accurate. I reviewed timelines. I signed affidavits after reading every line. I corrected dates when dates needed correcting. I answered questions briefly and carefully, and then I waited. When the first civil hearing expanded into broader financial review, Daniel appeared in a different suit with a different expression. Less polished, more tightly managed. His attorney spoke often. Daniel did not. The pattern kept repeating. A document would surface. An explanation would be offered. Then another document would narrow the explanation. Then a third-party record would narrow it again. Bank confirmations, property records, phone metadata, calendar overlaps, expense reports, Nicole's statement, my notebook. The rest stopped recording. Even the text about embarrassment and regret found its place. Not as the biggest thing in the file, but as part of the pattern. Pressure in private, image in public. I remember one afternoon in particular, about 7 weeks after the anniversary night. We were in a conference room during a settlement session. Long table, filtered water, legal pads, 2 wall clocks that didn't quite match. Daniel sat across from me with his counsel. For most of the meeting, other people did the talking. Then, near the end, there was a pause while documents were being exchanged, and Daniel looked at me directly. "You could still keep this quieter," he said. "No anger, no pleading, just habit. The old belief that privacy could still be used as leverage." I folded my hands on the table. "It was quiet," I said. "You used that." He said nothing after that. That was our real confrontation, more than the one in the study. Not because it was larger, because it defined the truth in one sentence. Eventually, the outcomes took shape the way real outcomes usually do, through separate tracks. The marriage ended. The property division changed once the concealed assets and transfer activity were fully examined. The condominium and LLC records became part of a much larger review. Client complaints that had once been dismissed as confusion were reopened under new scrutiny. Daniel's firm placed him on leave before removing him altogether. Regulators continued their work. Civil claims followed. Some of the financial consequences took months to become final. Some took longer. I will not make it neater than it was. Real systems are rarely fast. Real accountability is often administrative before it is emotional. But the direction became clear and never reversed. Daniel lost control of the narrative first, then control of the money movement, then control of the professional setting he valued most. Not because I gave a speech, not because I humiliated him, because records were read in order by people whose job was to compare them. Jennifer, my sister in the original version of this kind of story, did not exist in my life exactly that way, but there was still one more difficult truth. My cousin Mara, who had borrowed from me on and off for years, had been answering Daniel's questions about family property and my mother's health updates in exchange for investment advice. That information surfaced later in email chains. When I learned it, I did not call her. I asked Miriam to send one brief notice requiring preservation of all relevant communications. That was enough. Boundaries do not always need commentary. Months later, when the final settlement papers were ready, I sat alone at my kitchen table in the temporary apartment I had rented after selling the house. The room was quiet except for the refrigerator motor cycling on and off. A mug of tea had gone lukewarm by my elbow. I read every page, all of them. Then I signed. Not quickly, not dramatically, just carefully. When I finished, I placed the pen beside the stack and looked out the window at the parking lot below. A woman was helping a little boy out of the back seat of a car. He jumped down holding one shoe in his hand, and she bent to fix it for him before they walked toward the stairs. Ordinary scene, ordinary light. I remember feeling grateful for that, because by then the truth had already been established where it mattered, through documents, numbers, timelines, recordings, third-party confirmations. No single piece had done it alone. Together, they left very little room for argument. That evening, before I turned off the kitchen light, I received one more message. Not from Daniel, from Miriam. Tomorrow we discuss the foundation paperwork, if you still want to do it. I read it once and set the phone face down. Then I stood in the quiet apartment for another moment and let myself consider that question seriously. Not revenge, not reinvention, just whether I wanted to build something useful out of what I had learned. Then I washed the teacup, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. The apartment became home slowly. Not through any single moment, just routine. I bought 2 white mugs that matched. I folded kitchen towels the same way each time and stacked them in the top drawer. I labeled a file box for taxes, insurance, legal papers, and property records. I kept the counters clear. I opened the windows in the morning when the weather allowed it. At night, I locked the door, turned off the lamp by the sofa, and let the quiet stay quiet. That was the part one had wanted most. Not victory, order. A few months after the settlement was finalized, I met Miriam at a small office space on a side street near the park. It had previously been used by an accountant. Beige walls, good light, 2 rooms in front, 1 room in back, and a narrow storage closet with shelves already built in. I stood in the doorway holding a ring of keys while dust moved through the sunlight. Miriam handed me a folder. "These are the nonprofit formation drafts," she said. "Read all of it before you sign." I smiled a little. "I will." She smiled too. I know. That office became the beginning of Harbor House Financial Advocacy. Not a dramatic name. Not meant to be. Just a place where women dealing with financial control, hidden accounts, pressure, document manipulation, or quiet intimidation could come in, sit down, and understand what to gather first. Statements, tax returns, property records, loan documents, passwords changed without explanation, mail that suddenly stops arriving, names of entities that appear once and disappear. We did not promise rescue. We did not promise fast outcomes. We offered structure. That was usually what people needed first. Evan helped install cameras, entry controls, and a calm front desk system that protected people without making the place feel watched. Anita volunteered one afternoon a week and trained clients how to read patterns in account activity. Miriam held clinics twice a month where she explained protective orders, disclosure rules, and why reading every page matters more than speaking for an hour in the wrong room. I handled intake. I made tea. I organized binders. I listened. The first woman who came in was a school librarian named Teresa. She carried a tote bag full of unopened mail and apologized 3 times before she even sat down. Her husband had taken over for convenience, and now she no longer knew which accounts were real and which ones were only the version he showed her online. I remember sliding a yellow legal pad toward her and saying, "We don't have to solve everything today. We just start with what we can verify." She looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. That was the work. Not speeches. Not closure in the way people usually mean it. Verification. One clear page after another. Over time, the office filled in around us. A plant by the window. Framed resource lists on the wall. Locking cabinets. A basket of umbrellas by the door for rainy days. We kept a small tray of pens at reception because people always seemed relieved when they did not have to ask for one. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, after the last appointment ended, I would stay behind and straighten the waiting room. Fold the blanket over the back of the chair. Refill the tea bags. Wipe the small table near the lamp. Put files back in their labeled drawers. Those were my favorite minutes. That was when I could feel, most clearly, that my life was no longer being arranged around someone else's moods. One winter morning, nearly a year after the anniversary night, I received a letter forwarded through legal channels. Daniel. The handwriting on the envelope was still precise. Inside was a short note. No apology. No reflection. Only the familiar suggestion that I had exaggerated, that other people had interfered, that private matters should have remained private. I read it once at my desk. Then I placed it in a file marked Closed Matters. Not on the wall. Not framed. Not saved as a reminder. Just filed. That felt more honest to me. Some things do not deserve display. They only deserve a place where they can no longer interrupt the room. By then, I had stopped thinking of the rest stop as the center of the story. It was only the point where everything visible finally matched what had been true for a long time. The real change came later, in quieter forms. Reading before signing. Checking what changed and when. Keeping copies. Letting silence be a decision. Trusting process more than pressure. If there was a lesson in any of it, it was not that I had become harder. It was that I had become clearer. A few weeks ago, just before closing, I got a call from a woman in another county. She spoke carefully, as if someone might be listening from the next room. She said her husband had started moving mail, changing passwords, and insisting she didn't need to trouble herself with tax documents. I wrote down her name and gave her the first 3 things to gather. Then I told her we would make time for her the next day. After I hung up, I sat for a moment with my hand still resting on the phone. Cases are never identical. People are not interchangeable, but patterns do repeat. And when they do, it helps to have somewhere calm to bring them. That night, I locked the office, stepped out into the cold air, and walked to my car under a row of bare trees. The street was quiet. A bakery 2 doors down was closing for the evening. I could smell bread and coffee when the door opened. At home, I made tea, folded a clean dish towel, and set out the papers I needed for the next morning. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood for a second in the stillness. Everything was in its place. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. And if you enjoy calm, true-to-life stories about people finding clarity, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always like seeing where everyone is listening from. And when this one ends, 2 popular stories will appear next if you want to keep listening a little longer.